We didn't come into this one expecting noise. There was no shouting at first, no slammed doors. Just a table set too carefully and a pause that lasted half a second longer than it should have. That pause was where the story started to tilt. Cora Linfield is a designer who spent years being treated like an accessory in her own family, useful when needed. Invisible the rest of the time. What happened to her matters because it didn't begin with loss. It began with something handed to her and immediately taken back. This is how she remembers it. I was still holding the envelope when my father leaned across the table. "Let me see that." The paper slid out of my fingers before I could react. Victor Linfield didn't open it gently. He pulled the check out, glanced at it once, and laughed under his breath. $25,000, he said, like he was reading off a bad joke. "Dad, this is exactly the kind of thing I told you not to do." My grandfather's hand tightened around his glass. "It's my money." Victor waved the check once, then set it down on the table instead of handing it back to me. "It's sentimental money. From an old account. It doesn't mean anything." My brother Ethan smirked. "Guess Christmas came early." I reached for the check. Victor didn't move it closer. "You shouldn't read into this." He went on. "Numbers confuse you. That's not an insult. It's just reality." The fire popped behind him. Someone cleared their throat. No one else spoke. "Give it back," my grandfather said. Victor turned. "Dad, don't encourage this. Put it down." That was it. Not louder, not sharper. Just final. Victor held his stare for a beat, then slid the check toward me with 2 fingers, like he didn't want it touching him. "There," he said. "Just don't embarrass yourself." I folded the check and slipped it into my pocket. My hands were steady. My chest wasn't. For a moment, we simply watched them sit there, father and daughter at the same table, the power already decided in his mind, the damage already done. I didn't sleep that night. The lodge was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in. I took the check out and laid it on the dresser. I read my name. I read the amount again, written out in full. In the morning, I drove to Bozeman. The teller looked at the check, typed, paused, then nodded. "It's valid. Funds are available." I didn't smile. I thanked her, took the receipt, and sat in my car until my hands stopped shaking. Because if that money was real, then something else wasn't. Later. When my phone buzzed with a message from my father, "We'll talk when you're ready to be reasonable," I didn't answer. If this story stays with you, pass it along. Some silences deserve witnesses. The bank was warm in that quiet, controlled way. No music. Just the low hum of printers and someone tapping a pen against the counter. I slid the check across the marble. The teller glanced at it, then at me. "Give me a moment." She typed, stopped, tilted her head at the screen, typed again. My fingers went numb against the edge of the counter. I stared at a small crack in the marble, thin as a hairline, and waited for the smile. The one that meant this isn't real. Instead, she nodded once. "It clears. Funds are available immediately." She turned the screen slightly, not to show off. Just habit. My name. The amount written out in full. $25,000. I thanked her, took the receipt, walked out without looking back. In the car, I sat with the engine off. The paper shook in my hand. Not excitement. Something tighter, like a lock clicking into place. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. "Don't build this up in your head. It's not what you think." I didn't answer. Another buzz. Almost right away. That account shouldn't even exist anymore. I folded the receipt and put it in my wallet. Carefully, like it might disappear if I didn't. We noticed the shift there. Not relief, not triumph, just a narrowing. A kind of focus that comes when something stops being abstract. By the time I pulled back onto the road, the mountains felt farther away. I kept thinking about how easily he'd dismissed it, how quickly he'd moved to explain it away. At a red light. My phone buzzed again. We'll talk later. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove. If that check was real, then the stories I'd been told all these years weren't, and I wasn't ready to hear another explanation. The first time I asked my father for help, it was for a laptop, not a new one, just something that could handle the work I was already doing. He listened, arms crossed, eyes drifting past me like he was checking the time. "You're good with visuals," he said, "but that's not a business. You can't keep confusing activity with progress." A week later, Ethan pulled into the driveway with a brand new luxury sport utility vehicle. Dark gray, leather seats. He leaned out the window, grinning. Pretty clean. Right. My father stood beside him, proud. You have to look serious if you want people to take you seriously. Ethan didn't have a company yet, just a pitch deck and a few ideas he liked talking about over drinks. The car cost $95,000. Nobody pretended it was a problem. At dinner that night, I mentioned the laptop again, not pushing, just reminding. Victor didn't look up from his plate. You don't need better tools. You need discipline. That phrase showed up everywhere. Discipline, structure, scale. Whenever money moved toward Ethan, it was framed as investment. Whenever I asked for anything, it was a lesson. We're protecting you. My father liked to say, you don't think long term. The trust came up a few years after my grandmother died. I wasn't supposed to know the number, but Victor told me anyway, like it was proof of how generous he was being. $780,000, he said once. That's what she left you, and before you panic, we're holding it. You're not ready. He said it the same way he talked about locking a door at night. Calm, responsible, necessary. We noticed how often that word came up. Protection. How easily it slid into control. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, the pieces had started lining up. The trips, the loans, the silence around my name whenever money moved. My phone lit up again. Ethan this time. Dad says you're being dramatic. I didn't reply. I sat there with the engine off, hands on the wheel, doing the math I'd been taught not to trust myself with. It was all too clean, too consistent. And once you see a pattern, it doesn't unsee itself. I drove out to my grandfather's place that afternoon. Not the lodge. His house sat farther up the road, smaller, quieter. The kind of place my father called impractical. Edward opened the door himself. No assistant, no rush. You look tired, he said, stepping aside. I went to the bank. He nodded once, like he'd already been there. We sat at the kitchen table. He poured coffee with hands that shook just enough to be noticeable. I didn't comment. The trust. I said. I kept my voice even. Is it still there? He didn't answer right away. He set the pot down carefully, like the weight mattered. Your father told me you asked to delay it, Edward said. Said you sent emails. Said you weren't ready. I never sent anything. I know, he said quietly. I know now. My stomach tightened. Then where is it? Edward leaned back, eyes on the window. I suspect it's gone. Or close enough that the difference won't matter to him. That's not management. I said. The words came out flat. That's theft. He didn't argue. I don't have proof. And without proof. I'm an old man with failing judgment, according to your father. The room felt smaller after that. We noticed how still he became when he said it. Not defeated. Careful. He's already mentioned power of attorney. Edward added, just in passing. Just enough to test the ground. I took a breath. So you're trapped. Not trapped. He corrected. Limited. The coffee went cold between us. What if he thinks he's winning? I asked. Edward looked at me then. Really looked. Then he'll show his hand. I nodded. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from my father. Ethan needs your help tonight. Don't start making this bigger than it is. I turned the phone face down. Edward watched that too. You don't owe him your silence. he said. I didn't answer, but something had already shifted. They hadn't been holding anything for me. They'd been holding me back. Edward stood at the sink longer than necessary, rinsing the same mug twice. The water ran, stopped, ran again. Victor's been careful, he said finally. Careful people don't panic unless they think they're losing control. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under my weight. He already thinks I'm dramatic. Edward gave a thin smile. That's useful. He turned, drying his hands on a towel that had seen better years. If I accuse him outright, he'll turn it around. Say I'm confused. Say I'm not remembering things clearly. He wouldn't. He already has. Edward replied, just not in public. That landed heavier than I expected. I pictured my father saying it gently, professionally, concerned, all the words he used when he wanted something to sound reasonable. So what happens if he gets power of attorney? I asked. Edward didn't answer right away. He sat across from me, fingers folded. Then I lose the right to stop him. And you lose any chance of getting the truth on record. The room felt tight again, smaller, like the air had been measured. We noticed how neither of them raised their voice. That's usually when the real stakes show up. Edward leaned forward. I can't fight him head on, but I can let him think he's already won. I met his eyes. You're talking about bait. I'm talking about temptation. He said, I'll offer him the estate early. Tell him I want things settled, clean, and the trust, that's where he slips. Edward said, if it's intact, an audit clears him. If it isn't, he'll try to fix it fast. My phone buzzed on the table. Another message from my father. We need to talk tonight. Edward glanced at it, then back at me. If you're going to step out of his reach, he said, now's the moment. I nodded once, not brave, just ready. My father called that evening. Not a text this time. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. When I answered, his voice was calm. Too calm. Ethan's pitch is tomorrow, he said. He needs the slides tightened up. You can handle it tonight. I stood at the counter, keys still in my hand. I can't. A pause, short, measured. You can. Victor replied, you're choosing not to. I'm choosing no. Silence stretched out, thin and sharp. That's not how this works, he said. We support you. You show up when asked. You don't support me, I said. You assign me. His breath came through the line. Slow, controlled, careful. I am. The word landed between us. He didn't like that. If you keep pushing, Victor went on. I can make things difficult. Phone, lease, introductions you rely on. Don't pretend you're independent. My chest tightened, but my voice didn't change. Do what you need to do. Another pause. Longer this time. We heard it too the moment when leverage stopped sounding solid. You're being emotional, he said finally. We'll talk when you've calmed down. The call ended. I stared at the dark screen, waiting for the rush, the fear, the regret. It didn't come. Instead, my phone buzzed again. A text. You're overreacting. I turned the phone face down and sat on the edge of the couch. My hands shook a little. I let them. A few minutes later, another message came through, this one from Edward. Did you say no? I typed back. Yes. The reply came almost immediately. Good. Let him feel the gap. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The room was quiet. Too quiet. But it was mine. And for the first time, his voice wasn't the loudest thing in it. Edward made the call the next morning. He didn't put it on speaker, but I could hear my father well enough from where I sat. Victor's voice filled the room like he owned it. Dad, he said. Warm, almost relieved. This is a surprise. Edward let a beat pass. I've been thinking about time, he said, and how much of it I have left to manage things properly. Another pause. I pictured my father straightening in his chair. I want the estate settled. Edward continued. Early. Clean. No confusion later. Victor didn't hide it. That makes sense, he said quickly. We've talked about this before. There's one condition, Edward added. A full audit first. Especially Cora's trust. My attorney insists. The silence on the other end was sharp enough to hear. Of course, Victor said at last. That won't be a problem. Edward thanked him and ended the call. He set the phone down carefully, like it might bite. That was fast. I said, He thinks this ends well for him. Edward replied, That's important. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from my father. We're moving forward with the audit. Don't complicate things. I didn't respond. Another message followed. This is about nearly $19 million. Let's be adults. We noticed how quickly the tone shifted. Confidence layered over urgency. It had weight now. Edward watched me read the messages. He'll try to fix what he broke. He said, People always do. And if he can't, I asked. Then he'll make something. Edward said, and that's where he slips. That night, I kept my laptop open, didn't log in, didn't touch anything, just waited. Near midnight, a notification popped up. A new file had been added to the family cloud. Then another. Then another. I leaned forward, heart steady, eyes sharp. He'd taken the bait, and he was already rushing. The first thing that changed was the password. I saw the notification flash across my screen while I was brushing my teeth. Access updated. Session expired. I dried my hands and sat down at the desk. Logged in again. This time it worked. Barely. Files began appearing in the shared folder. One after another. Drafts. Scans. Names that tried too hard to sound official. I didn't click right away. I watched the timestamps stack up. Minutes apart. Sometimes seconds. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. The audit is procedural. Don't interfere. I didn't answer. I opened the first file. It was close. Close enough that most people wouldn't question it. Clean layout. Familiar language. The kind of document meant to calm someone who didn't look too closely. Another file dropped in. Then another. My laptop fan kicked on, a low whirring sound that felt louder than it should have. I closed one file, opened the next, compared. Small changes. Numbers adjusted. Formatting rushed. Then the access cut again. I froze. Counted to 3. Tried once more. This time. I got in. A final file appeared. The name ended with the word final, like that made it true. We noticed how quiet everything went then. No music, no messages, just the sound of keys and breath. I downloaded the file, then the folder, then the system log. My hands stayed steady. My shoulders didn't. Another message lit up my phone. This ends soon. I shut the laptop and leaned back. The room smelled faintly like dust and warm plastic. Midnight had passed without me noticing. He thought he was patching a hole. He didn't realize he was leaving fingerprints everywhere. By morning, the window would close. But I already had what I needed. I opened the file again in the morning, daylight cutting across the desk. It still looked convincing at first glance. The kind of document people trust because they want to. I zoomed in. The numbers sat just slightly off. Not enough to jump out. Enough to feel wrong. The spacing between characters wasn't consistent. The font looked close, but not exact. A substitute pretending to be official. I toggled the grid on. The alignment shifted. 3 pixels higher than it should have been. I checked the file details. Creation time. Late last night. Software listed plain and clear. A personal machine, not a bank system. My throat tightened, not from anger, from recognition. This wasn't careful work. It was rushed, confident. The kind of confidence that comes from never expecting to be checked. I scrolled through the revisions. Earlier versions saved over, not erased. Little adjustments. Bigger numbers layered on top of smaller ones. Like covering a stain instead of cleaning it. We could feel the moment slow there. Not shock, not satisfaction. Just the weight of knowing exactly what you're looking at. I closed the laptop and sat back. My hands rested in my lap. Still. My phone buzzed once. A message from my father. Everything's in order. I didn't reply. I packed the laptop into my bag, slid the drive into the side pocket, checked it twice. Once more before zipping it shut. He thought this was paperwork. To me, it was a confession. And he'd signed it without realizing anyone was watching. The conference room in Seattle was colder than it needed to be. Glass table, tall windows, the kind of place where voices carry even when people try to keep them steady. My father sat across from Edward, hands folded, confident in a way that used to make me shrink. He nodded along as the attorney spoke, like this was all routine, like nothing here could touch him. Edward asked me to connect my laptop. I did. The document filled the screen. Clean, official, familiar enough to pass. Victor leaned back. Everything's there, he said. We've been transparent. I zoomed in. Not dramatically, just enough. These numbers don't sit on the same baseline. I said, they were typed in later. He smiled once. Tight. That's design preference. I opened the file details. Scrolled, stopped. Created last night. Personal machine. Not a bank system. The room went quiet. That doesn't prove intent, Victor said. His voice stayed calm, but his jaw didn't. Edward pushed his chair back and stood. No tremor now. No softness. I trusted you with her future, he said. And you decided it belonged to you. Victor turned toward me then. You would have wasted it. He said, you don't know how money works. I met his eyes. I know how documents work. The attorney closed the folder in front of him. This triggers the no contest clause. He said, you're removed as trustee. And from the estate. Victor looked between them, then at me. For a second, the authority dropped away. Security walked him out without another word. 6 months later, the trust was restored, the estate restructured. Edward kept his seat at the table, quietly. I didn't move back into the family world. I built something smaller, a firm focused on document integrity, work that suited how my mind works. Edward invested without conditions, without commentary. Last week, my phone rang while I was reviewing a file. Victor's name lit the screen. I let it ring. I'm Cora Linfield. I used to measure my worth by how well I stayed quiet. Now, I measure it by how clearly I see, if this story stays with you, share it with someone who understands what silence can cost.